Hi, Elaine here. Today I'll be sharing how to create dot grid pages in Affinity Publisher. This has been much requested as it's one of the most common page types in planner creation. Handily, creating dot grid pages also showcases some very useful Affinity Publisher features. So let's see it. The initial setup of the page for this is a single page, A4, but I will be covering A5 shortly. It's RGB, there's no margins and no bleed. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is to create a custom grid. Technically, this isn't needed, but it is nice to see. It confirms your layout, and if you decide to create a custom dot grid page, it provides the perfect reference to make sure that your design lines up correctly. Up to View and down to Grid and Axis. And there are some presets available from the preset drop-down. They're in two categories, graph paper and parallel perspective. You'll notice that the graph paper starts at 1 centimetre square. If I select that, it puts 10 millimetres in the spacing. It has divisions of 1 and there's some colours there as well. I find it quite bizarre, it doesn't actually show it. You do need to put a tick in the box and the grid appears on the page that you're working on. However, one of the most common standard sizes for dot grid pages in planner creation is 5 millimetres. So what I'll need to do is customise this. It needs very little. All I need to do is change the spacing from 10 to 5. As soon as I move out of that spacing box, it applies those changes in the background, and that would actually be enough. But since 5 millimetres is a very common grid that I use all the time, it would make sense not to have to repeat this process every time I need it. There are features in this dialog box to help with that. Moving up to the burger menu next to the presets, because I've made changes, Create Preset becomes active. Clicking that allows me to create a name for this. So 5 millimetres would make sense. I can also choose to put that into a category, and there's 4 categories available, none of which particularly work great for me at the moment. So I'll leave it set to none, but click Create. In the presets drop-down, that is what that now looks like, with my new custom setting at the top. But back in the burger menu, because I've created a preset, I now get the option to rename that. I can delete it. I can even set it as the default. But I also have an option to manage the presets. Clicking that takes me into the preset manager. In here, I can create my own custom category. Clicking that allows me to name it, so I'm going to call this Planner Pages, as that's what I would be using it for most. Click Create and it puts that at the bottom. The little icon indicates it's a custom group. My 5 millimetres is at the top. I'm going to drag that down. It has to be in precisely the right location with the blue line showing when you release it, and that adds it to the new category. Click Close on that and then go and have a look, and the planner pages are at the bottom, and there is my 5 millimetre setting. And then I can just close that. As I said, technically not needed, but definitely a nice to have. First step in actually creating this page, I'm going to zoom in so we can see what we're doing, because we'll be working with very tiny elements. I'm going to get a rounded rectangle, and then holding the Shift key down, I'm going to draw that out. Almost right. I want it to be 1 millimetre. I also don't want it to have a border on it and no fill. I want that the other way around, like that. And I'm rounding it down so it's a circle, so it does look like a proper dot. I'm going to zoom into that so we can see it precisely, and you can see it isn't actually placed correctly. So moving it across, so we've got the green vertical line, the red horizontal line, and clicking the dot in the middle in the transform panel. And that shows us that the X and Y is now at 5 millimetres, which is absolutely correct. And I'll zoom back out. Now, we do not want a page full of black dots. We want something quite subtle, so I'll make sure that that has a fill of a light grey colour. And as I often do at this stage, I'm going to use Studio Link to go into the designer persona, and making sure that I have that called dot, I'm going to create a symbol from it and then quickly go back to the publisher persona. Now at this point I need multiple copies of it. And there are at least two ways to do this. There is what I call the old way. The old way would be to power duplicate that shape. I would need a row of 40 dots for line 1. I would also need 58 lines of dots. If you're doing the maths with me, that is 2,320 dots. Even with power duplicate, it would necessitate 98 power duplicate instructions. I know it's faster than doing it by hand, but to be honest, only just. There is now a new, much better way. That new better way is move duplicate. You only need 2 instructions. It is by far the fastest way to add 2,320 dots in the right place. So let's see that in action. With the dot selected, I think I will move in a bit so we can just see it, but with the dot selected, press enter, and that brings up the move duplicate dialog box. We want copies of the dot in a horizontal row to start with. So in horizontal, I'm going to put 5 millimeters. Everything else can stay at the default, but I'm putting a tick in duplicate. I happen to know how many of these I need. It was 40. If you don't, you can do this by eyeballing and just pulling out the number, and if you look behind the dialog box you can see it filling in, and you can see 40 is accurate. And OK on that. That's the first manoeuvre. What I do at that stage is select all of those shapes and group them, Command and G. The next thing I need to do, and we will need to see the full page for this, is to repeat that process. So press enter. Get the move duplicate dialog. This time it's not horizontal, I need it vertical, and I need copies 5 millimeters from each other vertically. So 5 in vertical, the rest can stay the same. Make sure there's a tick in duplicate, and again I'll show you what that looks like as you slide this across, because maybe you haven't counted. Take it too far, you can see them hanging off the bottom. But for me this was 58. It's actually going crazy here, so I think, seeing as though I know I need 58, I'll type 58 in. And at that point we have 2,320 dots in 2 steps. For the sake of organising the layers panel, it may well be a good idea at that stage to group together all of those rows as well. And we have a dot grid page, but we're not going to leave it there. A lot of these planner pages for digital planners are used in applications like GoodNotes, which does have multiple coloured digital pens. So you're not limited to light pages with dark ink. You could have dark pages with light ink. For that reason, I'll add a background. There are many different ways to achieve a different background colour. I'm going for a shape. That gives me more flexibility if I want to change a solid fill to a pattern, for example. So in this example, I'm going for a rectangle. I'm making it the size of the page, putting it behind the group, which is our dots. So I'll name that dots so we know what we're looking at. And the rectangle here, I will apply a colour to it. And if we zoom in, we can see we have dots on a grid. The grid is for the visualisation only. It won't print out. It wouldn't be part of a PDF. But it does prove that our dots are in precisely the right place. And that is our A4 page done. A5 is exactly the same. So let's make a new page. We will choose A5 in here. The only difference between this and the A4 is the size of it. Everything else remains the same. And in here, if we go to View and down to our grid, you can see that the grid settings that we created, our custom planner pages, exist at the Affinity Publisher level. So we are able to select that from here and apply it to the page. And then we would do exactly as we did on the A4 one. So for the sake of speed, I will go back to this and zoom in. I'm going to double click until I get down to that symbol. Copy it, go back to our A5 and paste. If we look down in the transform, you can see it's at X and Y 5 and 5, and the height and width is 1 millimeter. And then it's a matter of just replicating exactly what we did with the A4 page, which is press enter, set the horizontal to 5 millimeters. Everything else remains the same, but we do need multiple copies. For this one, we need 28 horizontally. Then I would group them, then press enter, move from the horizontal to the vertical, put 5mm in the vertical, make sure you have a tick in duplicate, and the number for this is 40. And it's that fast to create all the dots you require. Now then, of course, I'm going to go back to the A4 one at this point. Then, of course, you're going to need to make changes. There are 3 changes that you can make really easily. We used global colours, and therefore you can change the colour of both the dots and the background by editing the global colour. So it was in our document palette, which I had dot grid at the bottom. If I want to change the colour of those dots, I can edit the fill of the global colour, and they will all change. But that is not the only way that we can do this, which is important when we're talking about different styles of dot grid pages. So I'm going to undo that and get it set back to grey. The second way to change the colour does involve global colours, but it's only possible because we made a symbol of the dot. And that is, I could actually change my palette entirely. I've got some green ones in here. And as long as I've selected one instance of the symbol, I can completely change those dots in here by applying a completely different global colour. It would work exactly the same way with the standard colour as well. And I can do exactly the same with the background. So if I wanted a very dark page, I could do that. If we zoom out a little bit, you can see that is not as in your face as you would imagine. So changing the colour is the first option. I'm going to make that a little bit lighter. And let's zoom back into here to the shape. The second change you can make. I'm clicking multiple times until I get down to a single instance of the dot. Because it's a symbol, we can edit the shape, and that was why I used a rounded rectangle. So as I'm double clicking in, we can see we get the radius point. As I hover over that radius point and pull it out, now the dots are actually squares. So if the specific shape of this matters to you greatly, that is a brilliant way of doing it. But that's only a basic change to the shape. What if you wanted something more radical? So what I'm going to do is zoom in even further, get back to this, and make it completely different. So I'm scooting it down in size until it's 0.2. Then I am copying and pasting it. So I've got 2 copies of the same shape inside the symbol. Now they are next to each other. But what I actually want to do with this is hold the Shift key down and rotate it to 90 degrees. And then position it at 5mm vertically and 5mm horizontally. Move the other shape to the 5mm point, and what we've managed to do is take what started life as a rounded rectangle, became a circle, then became a square, and we've turned it into a cross. Looking at the anatomy of the symbol, we have the dot, which is the symbol, and inside that we have 2 elements which together are forming a cross. So I could group those together within the symbol if necessary. And you have completely customised dot grid pages. Using this exact technique, I was able to create multiple dot grid pages. Here's just a few examples of the impact of changing the colours both of the background and of the dots themselves. Final output is only limited by your imagination. So let's have a quick recap. I created an A4 page and a custom grid at 5mm. To create a dot grid page from that, we needed 2,320 dots. The old way would have required 98 power duplicate moves. The new way, which is the move duplicate dialog, only requires 2. My first step was optional, and that was to create a custom 5mm grid. Then I added the first rounded rectangle at 5mm by 5mm, converted it to a symbol. My first move duplicate instruction was to move the dot 5mm horizontally and duplicate it 40 times. My second move duplicate instruction was to duplicate all 40 dots in row 1 5mm vertically and duplicate that 58 times. I then added a shape for the background colour and demonstrated that there were 3 ways to change your dot grid paper. changing the colour in 2 ways, editing the global colour or applying a completely different colour, which was only possible because it was a symbol, changing the rounding of the rectangle to slightly change the shape of the dot, and finally to completely change the shape of the dot, which then became a cross. If you want new tutorials and tips and tricks on a regular basis, check out my free training at elainegiles.com/VIP. Hit the subscribe button and notification bell so you don't miss future tutorials. And if you have any requests for specific tutorials, be sure to contact me. I would love to hear from you. Thanks for watching and see you next time.